Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gretchen Crosby Sims. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Politics, where our mission is to inspire students to engage in politics, public service, and our democracy. I'd like to welcome you to our final Speaker Series event of the school year. It has been a really exciting year at the IOP. We have hosted a live podcast with President Obama, conversations with Senator Shelley Moore Capito, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, and organizer I-Jen Poo, and a forum with both candidates in Chicago's mayoral runoff, Lori Lightfoot and Tony Preckwinkle. A special welcome to all of the alumni in the room, or I should say, a welcome back. We are really pleased to finish this year on a lively note as these members of the IOP's Board of Advisors join our own David Axelrod for a conversation on the 2020 elections. For those of you from the class of '89 who were hoping to see your classmate and our board member Howard Wolfson, he sends his regrets, but had to go home to coach his son's championship football game this afternoon. So, priorities in the right place. Our programming will return when classes resume in October. The best way to stay informed about what's happening at the IOP or to learn more about our programs is to sign up for our newsletter, which you can do on our website at politics.uchicago.edu. In the meantime, you can stop by Table 6 on the quad tomorrow, where you can talk to a few of our staff members and learn all about that we're doing at the IOP. For this event, we will be taking audience questions after the conversation. We'll have you line up behind the microphone that's going to be just sort of back there, where my colleague is raising his hand. Please line up behind the microphone and remember that everybody is welcome at the microphone. As usual, though, we do give priority for the first 3 questions to students, and those would be current students. Would like to ask you at this moment to please take out your phones and make sure that they are off or on silent. And here to formally introduce our panel is Angela Seeger. Angela is a 3rd year from New York studying history. During her time at the IOP, it's a long list here, she has served as an events ambassador and as a Speaker Series intern, managing 40 other students to help put on events like this one. Next year, she is an incoming co-chair of our Student Advisory Board, and this summer she'll be interning at the New York City Council. Yes. Please join me in welcoming Angela to the podium.
Good afternoon, and welcome to our last event of the year. It is my pleasure to introduce 5 outstanding public servants who have dedicated blood, sweat, tears, and many sleepless nights to making our country a better place. Serving as a core advisor to Obama's Senate and presidential campaigns, Robert Gibbs helped shape the team's campaign and communication strategies. He would later serve as the White House press secretary from 2009 to 2011. He is now the Executive Vice President of Corporate Relations and Global Chief Communications Officer at McDonald's. Ed Gillespie served as the 61st chair of the Republican National Committee and was counselor to President George W. Bush. He also founded the bipartisan lobbying firm Quinn, Gillespie & Associates, as well as the consulting firm Ed Gillespie Strategies. He is now managing director and chairman of public affairs at Sard Verbinnen & Company. Jennifer Granholm was the former attorney general and 2-term governor of Michigan. When the going gets tough, Miss Granholm gets going. She does. She steered Michigan through the Great Recession in 2008 and helped diversify the state's economy. She now serves as a senior political commentator on CNN. Known as one of the Republican Party's most successful political media consultants, Mike Murphy has handled strategy and advertising for more than 26 successful gubernatorial and senatorial campaigns. He now is co-director of the University of Southern California's Dornsife Center for the Political Future, which aims to combat political polarization through discourse and education. And finally, David Axelrod. Thomas Jefferson said one of his greatest accomplishments was not being Secretary of State or President. It was founding the University of Virginia. David Axelrod has advised more campaigns than we can count, including the historic one of President Barack Obama. But he also founded the Institute of Politics back in 2013. I don't want to speak for David, but I think he should feel awfully proud of this place that he helped build, a place that continues to grow, improve, and encourage students to pursue a career in public service every year. On that note, please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage.
Thanks. Thank you, Angela, and you're right that the IOP is something that I hold near and dear, in part. Is there anybody here from the class of '76? What happened? How do we get so old? Me, not you. I barely made it to graduation, but I'm an alum as well, and the IOP in part was born because of what I didn't see here back in that day, and I'm so happy to have been able to play a part in bringing it here. We have here not just stellar board members of the Institute of Politics, but some of the great political minds in America, and at the end of this program, they are going to tell you the outcome of the 2020 election. We will not reveal it until then. We don't want you to leave your seats. So, but let's just get right into it. Jennifer, there is a big discussion about what is the most important thing to Democratic voters, and is it defeating Donald Trump?
Yes.
Okay. Mike Murphy.
I hope you have a lot of questions, given the quickness.
This isn't Jeopardy. Okay? Or finding a candidate who is of like political philosophy, ideology. What do you think is going to guide the choice that voters make in 2020, Democratic voters?
Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of easy because of the fact that you don't get any of the policies through. You can't put any of the people into positions of authority unless you deal with the first question, which is defeating Donald Trump in 2020. So for many of us, that is simply an existential question. And we're, many of us, again, I don't speak for everyone, and obviously this is a bipartisan crowd, so folks on the left-hand side of the spectrum, I'd be curious, and maybe when we get to question and answer, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, but I can tell you from the people that I know and associate with, the first and most important thing is taking our nation back from what many of us see as the clutches of somebody who has caused us to be driven into the cellar of international esteem, the person who has really put communities across the country, made them feel in jeopardy and unsafe, and has been a terrible, terrible leader and representative for this country. So many of us feel so strongly that the first order of business is putting someone as the nominee who can defeat him.
Not Jeopardy, it's not the DNC either.
Right.
Let's try and strike a middle ground here. So who is that? Yeah, Mike.
No, I would just say one thing I'd caution everybody is to never forget that voters make all the rules. So people say the number one thing is to beat Donald Trump, so therefore we need a candidate who will appeal to swing. Now, voters may often think the way to defeat Donald Trump is to nominate somebody like me who's going to crack down on the big corporate spending and the rich people, so they can blend together.
By me, you don't mean you.
No, not me, believe me. In a Democratic primary, I'd be tarred and feathered immediately, and I'm hoping one doesn't break out here. But no, my point is that when we say an electable candidate, if you're a political junkie, that means one thing. If you're a voter, it may mean somebody will finally take your message forward. And so the voters are very capable of having both opinions simultaneously. We need to beat Trump with somebody like me.
Yeah, but I would say that in the Democratic spectrum, there is a breadth of opinion, but not a whole lot on the basics. I mean, we on the Democratic side would like to see affordable, accessible health care for all. We on the Democratic side want to also see the climate change addressed. I mean, there's a spectrum inside of that, but I think that those questions will not be addressed at all unless you get to the first one.
Footnote, we're both from Michigan, and we've been political opponents for 3 decades, but we still get along.
But I'm right,
So
and
let
he's
me,
wrong.
yeah. I moved out of the state before I could vote against her, so.
And then-
she's ahead
But he
on
worked
point.
against me, so.
Actually, no, I
Then
didn't
she
really.
followed
didn't
you to
wanna
California.
No, I didn't work there.
Wait a second, wait a second, because I want to get
All
these
right,
other
arm
guys
wrestle
into the
right now.
conversation.
Right.
What did you say? When the going gets tough, the tough get going? Anyway, Ed, well, I don't want to stick you with this question. Maybe I'll ask Gibbs this question because I have another question for you.
That's good or bad.
Yeah.
We had this,
got
I had
stuck
this
with it.
discussion with someone last night. Every election we've had since almost the beginning of this century have been change elections. The impulse for change has driven that election. In a race between Vice President Biden and President Trump, who would be the change candidate?
I hope I don't have to actually come up with an answer for that. I think that will be tough. If you look at the broad electorate, I think to build off of what Governor Granholm said, I mean, for Democrats, they can certainly envision what that change means and looks like pretty easily. And I don't think you're not talking about an election with a huge number of swing voters who are just going to sit around and they're, betwixt and between on kind of the most polarized political environment that we've probably ever seen. And I think Mike's right that you can have both of those tensions, but I do think that I think for Democrats, winnability is going to carry the day. And if they find somebody or see somebody that they believe has a better chance than somebody else, you can forgive 1 or 2 policy positions or the fervency of some belief in this or that to win that office. And I think, I forget exactly where I saw this, but we see interest in the 2020 election more than a year away from that time at near peak levels, which means we've still got a year plus the summer and early fall to build that crescendo even more. And so I think that electability argument is likely to only get stronger.
Ed, on this question of whether there are swing voters out there, presidents' political theory has been very base-oriented. Generally, presidents get elected and they try in some way to expand their base. That has not been his strategy. His strategy is predicated on the notion that if he just maximizes his base, that he will win. And he won narrowly in 2016 with that philosophy, primarily because of 80,000 votes in 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Are there enough votes out there for him to replicate that strategy? It seems like he drew an inside straight.
Yeah, and I think there could be. I always say when you look at the president's job approval numbers and ratings, no doubt he would lose a referendum, but he might win an election. And that's what we have next year. And to your point, David, about that kind of the Great Lakes drawing the inside straight, I think he's got to try to do that again when you look at the map.
Are there states that he could win that he didn't win last time? I mean,
I
reasonably?
am hard pressed to see any that he could carry this time that he didn't, and he's got to be careful not to lose. He's got to protect Florida, obviously, and he can't lose Arizona, which I think is going to be a contestable state in this elections. And he can lose Pennsylvania and Michigan. If he holds Wisconsin and Maine too, that's still 270 electoral college votes. So the answer is yes, I think he could. I don't know that he'll replicate all 3 of those on the inside straight, but he only has to replicate one of them to hold 270 electoral college votes. Let me make one other point about the swing voters, because much has been made, obviously, of the Obama-Trump voters, and clearly there were a number of them in those 3 states in particular, I think. But we also know, to your point about driving up the turnout in the base, that's always a goal of a presidential campaign, and then you try to attract as well. But I think, as we all know, a lot of those, kind of that swing is not a huge, 15, 20% of the electorate voting one way one election and another way the next election. It's who turns out. And it's the fact that in some elections, more Republicans stay home and more Democrats come out, or more conservatives stay home, more liberals come out, and vice versa. And that's clearly part of the calculation right now on the president's part, is he's got to get his people out.
And just say, I absolutely agree. I do think there's a small sort of Obama-Trump.
There is.
I mean, it was interesting. I say this to my two Michigander friends. I remember waking up the Saturday after the election in 2016 and early, and I woke up and I went downstairs and I looked up old election returns from Michigan, and I started going through counties, and I went through the ring of counties essentially around the Flint area, and it took me about 15 minutes to start to see there are places where President Obama won twice and won with 60% or 58%, that Trump was winning with 56 or 55%. And you start to, it was interesting, you're confounded maybe because of the prediction of what you thought was going to happen. But then when you look at that ring, again, it took me about 15 minutes to go, oh, okay, I get it. And I definitely think there is some of that. I think that's a voter that could swing again because they found something in two elections that they thought wasn't being talked about in a third.
And those same voters voted for the Democrat in both Wisconsin and Michigan and in Pennsylvania in 2018.
Yep.
And so the question is, I mean, Democrats have often, there's this sort of false choice, which is this binary choice. You either go for your base and try to motivate them, or you go for persuasion and try to persuade the swing voters. It has to be both. Clearly, you've got to get out your base, but the geographic distribution of the Electoral College means that you must also go back and pull those voters who voted for Trump, Obama, or who voted for Granholm, Trump, or Gretchen, Whitmer, and Trump. So they're there, but both strategies have to occur. And you don't have to win, for example, the white rural voter. The Democrats don't have to win, but they have to go from, 85-15 to maybe 75. I mean, there has to be
There's
some movement.
10,000 people in Michigan.
Right, 10,600 people.
And actually,
Who's
it's
counting?
less now because of demography. I think there are two big questions when you try to get in front of an election and try to predict forward. One we probably know the answer to, one we do not. The question we know the answer to is if you take all the cable TV noise away and all the instant polls and all that stuff and just look at what a Wall Street person would call mark to market, what's the real value of an asset? In politics, mark to market is election day. And in every election, 75% of the special elections in 2017, the gubernatorials in the off year, and the midterm congressional races, there has not been a good news day for the Republican Party. We've held a few seats that are ours with a moat around them, but we've lost a lot of seats we shouldn't have lost. That's the country trying to punish the president. The president's numbers are terrible. They've stayed pretty terrible. So the president, I believe, is the atomic clock of being who he is. I doubt he will change and adapt like most politicians will. So there is a high probability that on election day, a country that is 1% more democratic now than it was just on demography, might be 1.5% by election day, is likely to have a lot of headwind for the president's reelection. The question we don't know the answer to is who the Democratic nominee will be. Will it be somebody that the president can work with, which means move the election from fire Donald to you think I'm bad, look at blank.
I think you mean work over.
Equivalently, yes.
Yeah.
Or will the Democrats nominate a candidate who will get out of the way and let the country fire the president? And that is what the next 10 months plus are really about. It's like a jump ball basketball. Who's going to get control? Because this incumbent's in real trouble. Does that mean cannot win? No. But is in trouble by every way we measure political candidates, whether the demographic trends are the right way, rather the history of the last elections under that president. Whole bunch of stuff Democrats can take some comfort in. But Trump is very good at making an election about a referendum about some other person, and that's the open question.
Well, Robert and I were involved in a campaign in 2012 for re-election, and 1 year in advance of it, remember Nate Silver's piece in the New York Times, the headline was, "Is Obama toast?" And we built a campaign around both middle-class economic issues, but very much with a mind that Governor Romney was going to be our opponent. And he was a uniquely unsuited, fine person, and but uniquely unsuited for that particular election year. People were very angry at Wall Street, angry at the financial community. He was an icon of the financial community. It does help to have an opponent. It's much easier to run against an opponent than to run against yourself. Right. Jennifer, David Wasserman is sitting over here, who, for those of you who don't know, is the numbers geek at the Cook Report and has his finger on all demographics and data. And we've had a running discussion because he's been a fellow here this quarter about who the swing voter would be in this election. And I think your assessment, and it makes sense to me, are non-college educated women who are not evangelical. And you must know this constituency from your years in Michigan politics. How movable do you think those voters are?
I think they're totally I mean, women in general are so, many women, most women, are disgusted with the current president. And I think those women are, I think you're right, that of all of the potential blocks of voters, those ones are, I think, the most primed to get back, especially if they are truly swing and they voted for, Democrats in the past. They are really concerned about, for example, they're most concerned about the fact that the president and his team have filed a suit to take away the protections of the Affordable Care Act, and that's 30 million people. There's a lot of women in that. They care about their families. They're not watching what's going on in Washington. They're not watching the Mueller report. They're not watching. They really care about what is going on with my family on the ground, and this guy is doing none of the things that he promised that he was going to do. If you watch any of these town hall meetings that you've been seeing with a lot of those kind of swing voters, not just women, but men as well, who are feeling like, wait a second, he said he was going to come and save these jobs, and he hasn't done that. It hasn't happened in reality on the ground. Well, women are really resonating with this and really are discussing. I think my mother is the classic example for this. She's a Republican. She was, okay, I'll vote for him. But now, she just can't even stand to turn on the TV when he's speaking. So I think
I thought she was Canadian.
Well, there are you Americans now, but they were once.
Okay.
Once back in the day, they were Canadian, but they've been Americans for a long period of time. But nonetheless, she can't stand it. I think she's not alone. Aunt Linda. I mean, there's a whole slew of my relatives who are feeling like, oh my God.
Let me just follow up 1 second, and anybody can jump in on this about Aunt Linda and others like her. You say that she's not watching the Mueller report. She's not watching all of this hoop-de-doo on TV and so on. How would she react if the Democrats moved on impeachment?
Let me just say this. She was very much against it about a month ago, and I called her up and I asked her this very question 1 week ago, and she said, I'm now open. But don't ask my dad. My dad would say, absolutely not, and he's very strongly pro-Trump. So I just think there's
What happened to you?
An education. Yeah,
Do they vote in
I don't know,
Michigan?
rebellion. No, actually,
Okay.
they vote in California, so
Okay.
they don't even vote in Michigan. But let me just say that I think there is a point to those who say that we need to help continue to educate people about what the contents are of the Mueller report and all of that, even though I think that's less important than the other issues that people are concerned about.
Robert, you're a student of the Iowa caucuses, and this process. How do you actually know who's making progress in this presidential race? We look at these polls, they're sort of irrelevant in the sense that a lot of people haven't focused on the race yet.
Yep.
And a lot of it's going to be filtered through the prism of Iowa and particularly Iowa and New Hampshire. How would you, as a discerning viewer of the race, what would you be looking for from these candidates?
Yeah, so I don't think it's early anymore, right? I don't think we've had the moments yet that will begin to define the campaign. You'll get that starting this month with the beginning of these debates. If I was looking at who was strong in Iowa right now, I would ask the question of who has or who is building the infrastructure for the moment when that shopping for a candidate gets narrowed down to who they really want to dig into. And then again, who has the apparatus to first identify that person, call that person, knock on their door, have those conversations with them. Literally, having 6 people over to a house and having coffee and having somebody from the campaign come in and talk to the campaign. It sounds very easy. It takes a massive amount of infrastructure. It takes a huge amount of effort to put all of that together. And I do think it is not, maybe, as I said, not early on the calendar. I think it is very early for people to make up their minds, particularly. It's going to get cold again before a lot of Iowa congeals around a candidate. And so the one thing I would say, though, and I said this earlier when we were in our meeting.
Congeals reminds me of the fried Twinkies at the Iowa State.
I was going to say, that I think we ate 3 of them.
Yes.
We were doing our
that
best
should be apparent
to ingratiate ourselves to the Iowa caucus. The one thing I would say, though, is there's always these moments in the campaign, and we just went through one where we have this moment or moments where we say, Iowa doesn't look like the rest of the country. It's not going to be as important this time. There's California and all these other big states moved up. And I couldn't disagree more. Somebody is going to come out of Iowa, a group of people are going to come out of Iowa, and they're going to suck all the attention in. They're going to take that road show to New Hampshire for a week. New Hampshire will begin to really get serious after they understand what Iowa did. They're fiercely independent and they're going to make up their own minds, but a whole group of people are all of a sudden going to say, okay, you know what, I want to see these 3 guys now in the next week, guys or gals. Then we're going to go to South Carolina. This whole notion that somehow, you'll hear a lot of this. California is going to start voting at the same time as the Iowa caucus. And you know what? They're not going to make a decision until they see how this process goes. And the last thing I'd say about how Iowa turns out, I think we're up to 23 Democratic candidates. So let me give you 7 names. These may sound familiar. Biden, Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Beto, Mayor Pete, and Cory Booker. Okay? One of those candidates is going to finish 5th in Iowa. One of those candidates is going to finish 6th in Iowa, and one of those candidates is going to finish 7th in Iowa.
And you think they get the home game and a hearty handshake in there?
Those 3, either any of those 3 of those 7 I just named could conceivably be a strong candidate for president. But it's inconceivable to me that with a 6th place trophy in Iowa, you're going to all of a sudden find yourself catapulting to winning California 4 weeks later. If you want to win California, win Iowa.
So here's an intriguing question, Murphy.
Yeah.
There are 2 African-American candidates in the race. Theoretically, that is a big advantage in the Democratic Party because a quarter of the Democratic vote is in the African-American community, and there are some states in which that vote is absolutely dominant in a primary, and South Carolina is one. In 2007 and 8, Hillary Clinton had a solid lead on Barack Obama in South Carolina among African-American voters until he won the Iowa caucuses, and those numbers flipped almost overnight. Had we not won the Iowa caucuses, that would not have happened.
Right.
So Robert's narrative, if one of those African American candidates were to finish third in Iowa, they're in a pretty good spot potentially to
I think
go
they
on
could-
a roll.
They could really run the table. I mean, Robert's totally right. Iowa is the early filter. Though what's happening now in Iowa is very much the beginning. There's a media law that every day's trivia is the biggest thing in politics. The voter law is we'll take our damn time and decide, including in Iowa. So what could very well happen is Iowa could filter it down to a lesser deal. And if you're one of the African American candidates, if there's a winner and loser, even if it's the third and fourth place, whoever wins kind of that bracket will then go into New Hampshire, and if they make some progress there, they can bounce down into South Carolina where there's a real home team advantage. By the way, I would hope if I'm a candidate to finish second in Iowa, because one of the best slogans in New Hampshire a week later is "Screw Iowa." Then you're really 2-1, run the table. I think in the internet age, in the old days it was top 2.5, now it might be top 3.5, because there's a little more bandwidth. But have no doubt that that early filter is important. All these polls are fungible. I worked for a long shot candidate once, and we came in third in Iowa, and 4 days later, we were 2 points out of first place here in Illinois. We hadn't been there except for a fundraiser in a year. Because the polls move off the huge noise wave out of winning and losing. Last thing I'll say is, a lot of the data does say, and I disagree a little bit about how you interpret what a winner is, but the voters want a winner. And if you come out of Iowa looking like a winner, that's good. If you come out of Iowa looking like a loser, that's curtains, because you're not what they're looking for. They want momentum, win, and ideological comfort.
So Jennifer, and then Ed, I want to ask you about a general election question. That is, I talked about if Booker or if Kamala Harris were to come in third and be viewed as having come out of Iowa with strength. If those candidates are Elizabeth Warren or Mayor Pete or Beto O'Rourke, don't they still have a problem in terms of breaking through with African American voters? Right now, Joe Biden is winning 50% of the African American vote nationally, I think more in South Carolina because of his relationship with Barack Obama. And those candidates don't have the kind of relationship with the black community that he does.
Right. I mean, they've got to, those candidates have got to really excel. And that means the debates are going to be so utterly critical. They will be going after Biden because Biden really is the block for them to be able to get into that first tier of candidates. So, you know, obviously the debates will be over 2 nights. I think Elizabeth Warren is probably going to be the strongest counterpuncher on that first series if they're on the same debate stage. The drawing occurs on the 15th or something like that of June, and so
It's like the NBA pre-draft lottery.
the pre-draft, right? So we don't know exactly who's going to be on what stage, but they're going to do everything they can to knock him down so that they then have a better shot in Iowa and New Hampshire because they know that he has got such an advantage in South Carolina in particular.
I would just say, I mean, the analogy you just used with somebody not having that relationship that they need with black voters. I mean, if you look at 2016, you could say Bernie Sanders at moments had momentum heading into that, and then without having that sort of deep goodwill that Secretary Clinton had, you get into this
with
run,
the African American.
with African American voters, you get into this run that starts in South Carolina, and it just, besides the Californias and some of the big states, it's the entire sort of southern section of the U.S. heavily concentrated, particularly in Democratic primaries and caucuses. And I think the question likely facing Senator Sanders in this race is, has that improved any, or is he going to find himself boxed in on the top?
He's getting
and
squeezed
the bottom?
quite a bit on a lot of different ends. Ed, there are like 12 econometric models that have predicted that Trump will be reelected. And a lot of them are predicated on the economy itself. Economy is, we're on a 10-year expansion. Today, the numbers were discouraging. The job number was just half of what was predicted. Wages declined. First of all, why isn't Trump doing better in the polling with this almost, this hugely robust economy? And secondly, if the economy slows down, how difficult will it become for him?
Well, one, not doing better despite the economy because he doesn't talk much about the economy and about the gains that have been made in terms of we're at a point now where there are more job openings than there are unemployed Americans. I don't know when the last time that happened was. The unemployment rate, obviously, very low, and across demographics, it's come down considerably. But that's not a focus of the president's speeches or his tweets or from the White House. And there are a lot of Republicans who wish that it were more the case that it would be. The numbers today are disconcerting.
I never heard a Republican say they were hoping for more tweets from the president, but go ahead.
More tweets about the economy. and the numbers today, if it's an aberration, May was just a bad month, that's one thing. June, July, in the summer, we continue to see that. I think that's a real danger. And to me, I think that what'll be interesting to see is, and I guess we have till Monday on the Mexican tariffs. To me, the Mexican tariffs are a much more politically risky approach than the China fight. When you look at the impact that it's going to have directly on the economy, more immediately, I think, on the economy. And we just talked a little bit about Arizona, and in some calculations by some of the president's strategists, if you believe what you read, they think that New Mexico and Nevada may also be potential pickups. To your question about are there states that they did not carry last time they could carry this time?
They think that.
They think that those are two potentials. I think it's, Arizona, trying to hold Arizona is going to be a challenge. But if they really go from 5 to 10 to 15 to 25 to 25% tariffs on Mexican goods and products, I think that's going to make holding Arizona harder.
It's going to make holding Ohio harder.
Going to make holding Ohio harder, too. I agree with that.
I mean, we live in the Midwest here, and now we've had several rounds of relief from the government for these farmers who are being victimized by these tariffs, but farmers don't particularly like.
They don't want it.
No.
Well, here's a great little factoid. You go to Mexico, you eat dinner. I'll make this a little stereotypical. You have black beans. You know where those black beans served in Mexico come from? Michigan. Number one producer by a mile. Massive exports. 2 million acres of soybean crops. Trump County soybean and black bean crops. So I totally agree. The Mexican tariff war will go right to the pocketbook of Trump counties. And in an election where you're talking 77,000 votes out of 13.5 million around the Great Lakes the last time, which has gotten worse demographically, that could be very, very painful.
What do we, I had this theory, it animated my advice to Senator Obama about his candidacy, that people, and this really related mostly to the succession races where a president was leaving, said the president who's leaving defines the election, and people rarely choose even if they love the president, the replica of what they have, they almost always choose the remedy. Who represents, if you think about Donald Trump, who is the remedy to Donald Trump? Is it Joe Biden? And what is the most salient quality of Trump that people are trying to remedy?
I think if it's brains incompetent, many of the Democrats think, no. Look, yeah, you're all primary voters. Cook County's done. It's other places.
Murphy is the master of the cheap applause line.
Yeah, no, I'm clearly pandering. Bernie! the perception is reality equation here, I think a bunch of them can make an argument, but in many ways the cleanest one is the candidate who's kind of got the little blink of excitement now, Mayor Pete, because he's the authentic brainiac, super competent, no drama type personality, and he's also young and gets it, thoroughly modern, as opposed to Trump, who many people would say is caught in 1958.
Wait, go ahead. Let's go down the line here.
Yeah, I could make an argument that Joe Biden would provide that contrast because he's really running on unifying and making sure, and bipartisanship and moving forward. And then sort of the next person I would say that is a really important contrast would be someone like Elizabeth Warren, who is talking about the system being rigged and corruption, and pointing to the administration as Exhibit A. So on both of those fronts, I think
Those are predicated, two different predicates.
yeah.
And Biden would move us forward to 1963.
Is that an ageist joke?
And
By the way, Mike will be here all weekend.
and
Tip your server.
Tip your waiters.
we want to go to questions. Who do you think Republicans most fear?
I don't think they've figured it out yet. I want to go to your first question, though, too. I think in terms of for the president and what do they need to solve for. And I do think there is, obviously, there's the polarization, there's and there's just so much constantly coming at you, and I think people would like maybe to counter that with a sense of stability and depolarizing in some ways. If that's the case, and you look at the field, then to your point, Mike, too, I would agree. Someone like Mayor Buttigieg or Vice President Biden. I don't think it's so much the ideological thing as much as it is people just feeling kind of worn out. Like, I'm just flat worn out.
Yeah.
And
Sleep
if
again.
I could get a little peace, that would be nice. And so I think that's, from a Republican perspective, a lot of Republicans.
Are there Republicans who feel that way?
There are, look, there are a lot of
My mother
Republicans.
used to say to me, I love you, I just hate the things you do. And it may be the
you're
opposite.
good at what
Maybe
you
I
do,
don't
but
like
what
you,
you do
but I
ain't
like
good.
the things you do.
Yeah.
Is for Republicans.
I think for a lot of Republicans, there's a sense that, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could get all of this without all of that? If we could get a 21% corporate tax, reduction in the corporate tax rate, and we could have domestic energy exploration and the Keystone XL pipeline approved, and conservative judges on the Supreme Court, and
Without madness.
and repeal that without the tweets and the porn stars and the constant controversies. And so I think there is a lot of that sentiment. Now, by the way, I should hasten to add, and a lot of Republicans will say to that, you don't get all this without all that. You have to have a disruptor in order to make those things happen. George H.W. Bush couldn't get those things done because they weren't willing to be so disruptive. But I do think there are a lot of Republicans who kind of share that sentiment.
I make 2 points.
And where is the microphone? Oh, it's right up here. So if you have questions, line up behind that microphone. Go ahead, Robert.
I make 2 points. I mean, I don't know the answer to who it's going to be, but I think you'll begin who takes advantage of these upcoming debate moments. There's going to be 19 people or 20 people over 2 nights. There's going to be some group that shows up, and there's going to be some group that comes in with a plan for making a moment happen that can begin to spark the contrast that people want to see. The second thing I would say, I think it will be interesting to see if you look at 1976, 1992, and 2008, the Democratic Party at moments of inflection tended to look for somebody that was younger and somebody that was not of Washington. In Carter, Clinton, and Obama, even though Obama was a senator, obviously he had not been there long. And so does that go along with your corollary of needing or wanting? I think the age debate is less about can somebody do the job. I think that age debate is as you talk about, in the contrast, and does the party look for somebody that fits that inflection build like you saw in Carter, Clinton, or Obama.
Just one quick Republican point. You know, I'm a never Trumper. In that crowd, the fear is the Democrats will nominate an Elizabeth Warren or a Bernie Sanders, and the economic agenda is so liberal it'll push us back into Trump world to hold our nose.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Sarah. I'm a graduate student here at the university. I wanted to ask about this term electability or winnability that we talked about at the very beginning of the discussion. I'm wondering if this is a useful term to use strategically, you know, for campaigns or on the Democratic side. I'm wondering if you believe like electability comes with baggage about, like, is it a gendered term, or does it kind of create this image regarding gender or race or sexuality? And if that is a useful term to use in the campaigns, or whether that creates a filter for a certain kind of candidate to emerge when it comes to identity.
Go ahead.
All right, I'll take that. I do think that when electability is paired with a female candidate, it is a gendered term. I think that often it refers to, you know, the tenor of their voice, or that they aren't what you would consider somebody that we've seen in that kind of position before. I do think, on the flip side, that just purely on polling numbers, right, who is most likely to beat this guy is a numerical thing. But when you talk about it in terms of, is Elizabeth Warren electable, often it has a gendered tone to it. Same thing, you know, I mean, is she nice enough? And women have to be both nice and competent and strong. And men, they don't have to be nice at all. Look at the guy who's in the office. So, you know, I mean, it's really often a term that is applied to, are you likable? And women have to be, until we get elected in numbers enough so that this is not an issue anymore. Unfortunately, generally, the population is harder on women, and they expect women to be likable and qualified. And that's an unfortunate byproduct of us not having enough women in office yet.
I will say it is practical politics. And in practical politics, electability is maybe a bad word, maybe not, but it is an idea that counts, which is competitive. If I were a Democrat, I would probably be torn between, do I want to make a real statement in who I vote for about what I believe, or do I want to support a candidate I think has the best chance to prevail?
I think electability can become a really difficult concept, though, if people are basically being told, we know this isn't the person you want, but they're electable, so live with it. And that is a danger for anybody who's running too overtly on the concept of electability. But that's, I know, not exact. I think Governor Granholm answered your question. Go ahead, and
I would
you
just
step
say,
up while he's.
I agree. I think I was probably sitting next to you in the green room in New Hampshire when then candidate Obama said that he thought Hillary was likable enough, and I think we both cringed.
Because it wasn't a very likable thing to say.
No, it was it was a little off his brand. But again, I think you know, 2 or 3 days ago, the Detroit News did polls of who's leading President Trump in Michigan. And so whether you call it competitiveness or electability, there's going to become a moment where we're going to put this through the filter of even bad polling, and there are going to be somebody on the top of the line or a couple of people on the top of the line that we're going to.
In this case, it was like 6.
Right. And if that's the case, then the electability argument can work for a lot of people. The question is, if somebody's up by 14 and somebody's up by the margin of error, that still gets sharp, and I still think that that's going to play a big role.
Yes.
Hello, I'm Andrew. I'm a first-year master's student at the Harris School of Public Policy. Thank you all for being here. My question is, I guess, more of a longer-term question, because you had mentioned Carter and Bill Clinton and Obama as kind of fresh faces at the time that they were nominated, and in this election, and that would seem to point to Democrats nominating someone like Mayor Pete as opposed to Joe Biden. However, my question has to do with longer term. Let's say the Democratic nominee, whoever he or she is, wins. Do you think that, whom do you see, if any of them, as having the potential to affect a longer-term transformation of American politics and American life? Because Carter, Clinton, and Obama, they all had notable achievements, but they didn't really change anything the way, say, Ronald Reagan did. That Reagan moved American politics to the right for a generation.
Right.
And I was curious if
Yeah.
which of the Democratic candidates, if any, do you see as
Having
as
worked for the
comparable
last
to Reagan?
transformational candidate, I think I would be very careful thinking that anybody is going to massively change the environment with which we live. And I hope that whomever is the nominee and whoever goes into this battle doesn't carry this idea that somehow their single election is going to change everything, because it won't. Because you see this every day. You could have the best idea in the world, you still got to get it through 2 houses of Congress. And so I don't. This election, whomever wins, the incumbent or a challenger, isn't going to markedly overnight change this, and it's going to be. That's something I think everyone.
That's why we've had a succession of change elections, because there is a frustration about the inability to do long-term things. I mean, the Affordable Care Act was an exception, but that is a challenge for democracy. We talked about this earlier. Democracy is designed to be plodding when our country is divided as it is now, and change is coming more rapidly all the time. We have big things that we need to do to deal with it, and not necessarily the wherewithal to do it. And that's a great challenge for whomever gets elected president. Go ahead.
I'm a 99 alum. Can you hear me? My question is about new narratives, not like your traditional narratives are debated, but the newer narratives about a particular election year. Let's say, the way I see manufacturing jobs was last time. Complex public policy issues aside, to what extent do you all see big tech bad guy as being one of the key narratives of the next election? How high would you think it ranks, and to what extent might it be debated from a political narrative perspective?
I think it's going to be an argument in the Democratic primary. I don't necessarily agree with it, by the way, and on disclosure, I've worked for Facebook, but I do think it has.
He was actually chief of security there.
In fact, I've got to catch a plane for Moscow here in 20 minutes, so I'll be leaving early.
Comrade Murphy should check in.
Tavares. Familiar word here, I bet. So bottom line, I think it's going to be, people are going to sell tickets on it in the Democratic primary. In the general, we'll see.
Well, I'll say this too, to picking up on Mike's point. I think it's probably more of an issue in the general. It may be surprising, and I think you're seeing on the Republican side, and you're even seeing it with the Trump Department of Justice, a fresh look at market power and concentration in tech in particular, and a little bit of the beginnings of a reappraisal of the antitrust approach from a conservative free market perspective. I think people are more open to saying, is this the same thing as, in the past in the economy, whether it be manufacturing or, retail, or is there something different about the tech sector and information technology that requires a different look at the historic approach to antitrust? So I think it may be
You're from the Bay Area now, so.
Yeah, I think that this issue of tech, the platforms exacerbating inequality, will mean that it is definitely part of the democratic conversation that's happening, and I think it will be thrust upon the general election too. The fact that a third of America works, for example, using the gig economy and platforms, and there are no benefits associated with those jobs, there's no retirement associated with those jobs, and you're seeing the frustration associated with the fact that the top 10 tech billionaires own more wealth than 40% of America. That inequality, I think, is part definitely right now of the Democratic primary, and I think it will carry forward into the general.
I would just add this, we ought to have the debate for a whole lot of reasons, the inequality one being a big one. We also ought to have this debate because I fundamentally can't grasp or understand if you can create a technology that connects and changes the world, why you can't stop that from being an outlet for people from Russia polluting our election in a very sophisticated way that they did, or the type of hate that whirls around at a moment's notice, the viral videos. We've just begun. We used to talk about somebody photoshopping somebody on somebody else. We're going to now have very sophisticated augmented reality where somebody is going to put up a video of somebody saying something. It's not going to be some slowed down version of somebody doing it in slow motion. It's going to be very sophisticated of somebody saying something they never even said. And we're going to spend 5 days, and it's going to gather millions and millions and millions of views and likes. And we don't have anything.
Agree.
Anything to stop that. We have zero guardrails on this. I can put something in Google and find out the answer in a tenth of a second, and yet YouTube is a sewer.
So I have to, you may not be able to stop that, but I have to stop you.
I'm done.
But I just want to go down the row and ask this question. I have a final comment. What is the percentage chance that Donald Trump will still be the president when the reunion of 2021 is held?
Well, my crystal ball is shattered. I said he'd lose by 3.5 million votes on election night, so I got to get to my job at Quiznos very quickly here.
No, you were right about that
of
part.
NBC exit polling. I believe the chance that Trump wins is 22%.
Really? That's pretty precise.
Yep.
I think it's 44%.
You must be 66, huh?
Yeah, right. That's the progression. You're
I'm a
an 88.
University of Chicago graduate. I get the pattern.
I'm gonna
Still, there would be
I'm
no
gonna
math.
bid $1. I don't.
Yeah.
I'd say right now 50-50. I just think it's too, well, one, because it's kind of a cop-out answer. Two, it's just too early to tell. But when we talk about, like I say, he could lose Pennsylvania and Michigan and still get, and that would still leave him with 270 electoral college votes. People need to, a lot of that the electoral college math gets overlooked a lot. So I'd say still probably around 50-50 right now.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think there are a lot of unknowns, and I think we will have a very, very close election.
Okay.
All groaning.
In respect for the University of Chicago, I'm going to change my number to 23% because
I'm going
Trump
to 46
deserves a
then.
prime number. It's an odd
So, first of all, this is a group that has volunteered its time on our senior advisory board. That's what it's called, right? Senior advisory board.
Yeah, we are kind of senior.
And we are so blessed to have them and their colleagues. We had a really robust meeting today about this year and our plans for next year. And I just want to say to all of you, maybe I'm not even allowed, I don't know, but who cares? I got the microphone. This kind of programming happens here all the time. We had 92 events in this last year. Those of you who are students at the University of Chicago know that there wasn't such a thing before the Institute of Politics. We have fellows who stay in residence here every quarter, a core of fellows who are practitioners who hold seminars. David Wasserman was a splendid one, and mentor students. We're sending 260 students on summer internships 60 of them to Iowa this summer, but in government and overseas in journalism. So if you find yourself thinking about how you want to earmark your dollars, all you well-to-do alumni, keep the Institute of Politics in mind, because it's added something to this campus that you uniquely understand was badly needed. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.